Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. This episode is brought to you by Nexus. Building a support a creator program is something all live service game developers should be doing. But without the right engineering bandwidth or marketing expertise, doing so can be a challenge. Nexus's Creator Program in a Box makes it easy for game devs to build and manage world-class creator programs, driving significant growth in conversion, ARPPU, retention, and LTV. Nexus has partnered with incredible live service publishers like Capcom, Grinding Gear Games, Hi-Rez, Ninja Kiwi, and more, and would love to help you, our Naavik Gaming Podcast listeners, do the same. If interested in learning more, simply head to nexus.gg/Naavik. There, you can learn more about the efficacy of support a creator programs and discover how to easily build your own. Again, that's nexus.gg/Naavik, or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Hi, everyone. I'm your host today, Aaron Bush, and today's episode is going to be a treat. I'm joined by Chris and Stephen Bell, two brothers who have led or been involved in several impactful games, including some of my favorites over the years, like Journey, Sky, Children of the Light, What Remains of Edith Finch, Blaseball, and more. We'll talk about reflections from all of those projects in this conversation, but the main impetus for this episode is that Chris and Stephen are also now co-founders of a new and ambitious games company called Gardens, and they just raised a large Series A to go with it. So we'll also be spending a good amount of time talking about what they're building and how it both expands upon and differs from some of their earlier projects. So I don't know about you, but I'm excited to dive in. Stephen, Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and start with some quick introductions. And so maybe if you could each just tell us a bit more about your backgrounds. And as a part of that too, I just have to know what your favorite game is that you've helped develop so far in your career. So Chris, we'll start with you for this one.
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris Bell. I'm the co-founder, CEO, creative director, and president here at Gardens. I got my start, first making a student game called in grad school called Way, which pairs strangers up to go on an adventure together. It's all nonverbal. It's kind of like Journey before Journey. And that project actually got me noticed by that game company and got me working on Journey, whereas I was a designer-producer. From there, I went on to be the lead designer of What Remains of Edith Finch. And after that was the lead designer of Sky, Children of the Light up until launch. And then co-founded Gardens with Stephen and Lexi Dostal.
So what was your favorite game?
Favorite game that you made?
This is maybe a strange answer, but I'm actually maybe most proud of my student game Way. And the reason for that is just because of what it was able to achieve in such small form. I think it actually leaves a great impression on players. And so we can talk more about how that game works and what it is exactly. But it's hard. I love all the games I've worked on. They're all, I hold them in high regard in all respects and in various respects. And I enjoyed working on them. And I loved working on them with those teams. So, but I'm going to go with the student game just because it's different and stands out in its own way.
Awesome. I like that answer. And in preparation for this episode, I was actually on YouTube watching a couple interviews you did over a decade ago when you were super passionate when Way was coming out. So I took some notes from that. Well, maybe we'll get back to that. But Stephen, how about you?
Yeah. Hi, Stephen Bell. I'm one of the co-founders. Also, we have another co-founder, Lexi Dostal, who's not here. So I just want to shout him out. But I am both narrative director and chief strategy officer here at Gardens. We kind of wear a bunch of different hats, especially when you're a young company. Mm-hmm. I got my start. I came up in like the film and TV space. Like I write and direct, still do a little bit. And kind of Chris and I had always like collaborated on projects together. So just through his working on Journey, I was kind of around for the tail end of Journey, helping out a little bit, like play testing, talking through things, getting to know like the indie scene in LA. Who, and more I would meet studios and they would find out like I was a writer or whatever, and they might be doing something narrative and they'd ask me to check it out and like maybe do some consulting, so forth. So I kind of went from being like a story consultant, games writer to narrative designer to kind of a full-fledged designer. My first like official gig was like writing on What Remains of Edith Finch. I bounced around, did a lot of different types of, contract work for studios, stuff that like Annapurna put out, Quantic Dream, kind of all over the place. While founding Gardens, I co-created this game called Blaseball, which is very different than what we're doing here at Gardens, but it's like a weird web-based fantasy baseball TTRPG thing. And so just kind of, been very lucky to work on a number of cool projects and get to just help out really, really great teams. In terms of my favorite project, it's so tough. I would have to say it's a kind of a tie. What Remains of Edith Finch was my first title. It obviously we won the BAFTA and like that was all crazy, but just seeing some of the fan responses there was amazing. And our family history, like so many moments and memories from our family is like all over that house. Like that goes for the whole team as well. It's just like, it's so autobiographical in so many ways that people don't understand. So, like if you're in Edith Finch and you're like creeping through the crawl space, and you look at like the AC compressor unit, if you zoom in, you'll see like a sticker on the compressor. And it's like, that's our dad has a small plumbing and heating company. And you'll see like the logo for his company on the compressor. Like there's just things all over the house that are just literal memories pulled from our family history. So that, and then also Blaseball. Blaseball is such a weird thing. It's such an amazing energy. The fan base and community was so incredible. And that was a thing that was just rapidly iterative, and getting immediate feedback, sometimes within a week or two. I've never had an energy like that before. So those two I'd probably say are my favorites.
Okay, those are great answers. We'll talk more about What Remains of Edith Finch in a little bit. That's one of my favorite games too. So I'm part of that fan base. But before we do that, before we dive into that and even just get into some of more details about the new company and the new game you're working on, I do want to take a bit more of a trip down memory lane here and explore some of the ideas and learnings behind some of these earlier games and successes, some of which I imagine actually help set a foundation for what you're building next. And so it'd be fun to explore some of those ideas. And so maybe first of all, Chris, ever since you were that college student and created Way, and soon after that Journey, it seems like you have obsessed at least a little bit about creating these like collaborative, more joyous experiences that tap into like a range of more positive emotions, maybe, and actions that most games don't prioritize. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, just kind of frame it as you see it. But I'm just curious, like, why have you kind of stuck with that focus over the years? Because it seems like you guys also might have a similar bent with Gardens as well.
Sure. Yeah. When it comes to the games I like to design, but also the games I like to play, multiplayer is definitely at the forefront of what we care about. Think about, the power in strangers coming together, in the opportunity of another person, of what they can bring to the table and the things they can offer you, and the drama that can unfold, or the different kinds of experiences. And so, you get a lot for free when you make a multiplayer game in a way, because versus being more of a content driven game where you're trying to create a bunch of experience or whatever for the player to go through, or systems or what have you. You get a lot by just bringing this other player that brings their whole self and whatnot into the world. So when I was in college and grad school, I made my thesis project was called the Universal Play Project, and the goal for that project was, let's make a game that gets two strangers to become friends. We didn't really have many great examples. There was examples of things that of like games that had some of the qualities that we were looking for, but there wasn't really a specific example that hit on all the characteristics that we were set out to hit. And so ultimately, that thinking and those ideas around communication, collaboration, constructive play coalesced into this game way, where two strangers get paired up in a foreign world. It's all nonverbal, and it's split screen. And one player is kind of like a platform, or like a puzzle platformer. One person's going left to right, one person's going right to left, and they can see into each other's worlds. But what we don't tell you at the outset is that you see the world differently from each other, and that you actually have to communicate how you see the world differently using nonverbal means. And so ultimately, you have this experience where these two strangers meet in this foreign place, where they're both kind of in need of each other and need each other's help to progress and communicate nonverbally with one another. And to spoil it, because the game's unfortunately no longer supported, the Unity version is no longer supported, so it's not playable currently. When the two finally meet, and that person going left to right meets the person going right to left, because really they've been heading towards each other from opposite ends of the world, slightly a metaphor towards their different perspectives and backgrounds. They meet in the middle. They can hug, they can hold hands, they can punch each other, whatever, using the same puppetry mechanics that they were using to communicate non-verbally. But most importantly, they come to a map of the world and they can draw on it for the first time. And it's there where they can communicate for the first time using words. And so someone might write like, "Oh, great job. Like, that was amazing." And circle, I'm in Los Angeles, so maybe I circle Los Angeles on the map. But then someone else might respond in kanji or Arabic. And you realize that you've been communicating with this person non-verbally the entire time, overcoming all of these challenges, only to discover that you don't even necessarily speak the same verbal language. And so that's a big epiphany for players. It kind of makes them take a step back and kind of observe and think about themselves and maybe their own assumptions about this person they were playing with, or what it means to communicate with a stranger from around the world. So that, seeing how strongly players resonated with that game, and how it was able to sort of conjure some of these moments that we love from online games. That's what got me working on Journey, and it was pretty much a really kind of perfect fit in a way, because I was already kind of working on this game about pairing up non-verbally with a stranger and going on this adventure. So Journey was like a natural extension of that, and it's continued up until this day. I think we'll talk a bit more about the game that we're working on in a bit. But you talked about making like collaborative, joyous experiences. That's certainly true. That said, we are definitely interested in asking the question of, can you create a collaborative experience to a degree, or get players to collaborate when they don't have to, or when they can potentially work against each other? And can you still create like a foundation of cooperative play that inspires them to work together and play together, in spite of maybe the fact that they don't necessarily have to, or could go the other way?
Yeah, that's a really cool idea, and just kind of seeing your chain of how you've kind of evolved your thinking over time is pretty interesting too, because even Way, I would argue, is still like a pretty innovative idea. We're making like the core gameplay non-verbal communication in some ways. Like that still is a pretty big, powerful idea that I don't think too many other developers have toyed around with or have thought about it as much as you have. And so I'm curious, maybe as a follow-up here, what do you think? Is there anything that you think is underappreciated, or that other developers don't think enough about when it comes to making these types of collaborative experiences?
I think, one of the things I think about is just like, how do you make these games playful? How do you make them expressive? How do you make sure that the player has a voice? And, even though it's nonverbal, these games, it's still important that you can see the player behind the avatar and kind of understand what they're thinking, or get an impression of what they're going through or feeling. So, taking like a nuanced sensitivity towards that, and building in those expressive tools so players can, perform for each other and kind of fill in the gaps. And then yeah, just looking at the nuances of that communication. I think, an example of a multiplayer game where players can work together, non-verbally is a game like Portal 2, where players can use the different, they have like a tagging system where you can kind of tag objects around the environment to kind of suggest what you communicate different ideas. Just the one thing about that game that's different than Way is that I do think in Portal 2 there's this it can have this effect where where players start competing to solve the puzzle before each other, and that's because once a player explains the solution, it's no longer interesting, and so Portal 2 ends up having this more competitive aspect. So definitely something to consider. But yeah, I think I put a lot of emphasis on how to make the player as expressive as possible. Think about those expressive tools and the affordances they have, and then how do we take those expressions and that playfulness and those ways of communicating and interacting with one another and form a game around it that's compelling, that brings these people together, that sends them on an emotional journey, etc.
Yeah, super interesting. And related, 4 years ago, Sky Children of the Light was released. And one of the innovative features of that game was that it made it impossible to progress without being generous to other players. And the game also, has native features that help players get over language barriers. And so, there's a bit of a motif here in that. And I know that you both played a role in that game. So I'm curious to hear both of your takes on just like what unique challenges or opportunities you faced in designing or building narrative around that kind of unique experience. And Stephen, maybe I'll start with you on this one, if you have thoughts.
I was on Sky in a much more limited capacity than Chris, but just looking at it from like a narrative angle, I think the game is beautiful and succeeds in a lot of ways. I think like one challenge we faced was like, okay, does this need a narrative on top of it? And I think it sometimes, in my opinion, there's a tension there. It definitely is like a spiritual sequel to Journey. It shares a lot of the same beats. But I don't think that's exactly what the game wanted to be. I think it has bloomed in a lot of ways since that first launch. Once people went on that full arc, got to like a literal ending, and then you have to invent reasons to come back, right? Like I think like I don't know if it's still there. I haven't played it in a while, but like we rolled credits at the end of that, right? And I think like personally, that's a mistake. I think I can say. Just because you hit an end point, and then as a player, you're like, all right, well, I'm done. I've finished it. Like, why am I going to go back? And that definitely is meant to be much more of a continuously expansive experience. So finding ways to think of narrative differently than I think we had been is something that I think we did to a degree, but, I think that was a lesson learned. And it's something that, a lesson that we've learned as we move into the project that we're making now, right? I am much more interested as a narrative designer in kind of just burying story as deep in a virtual world as I can and letting players dig it out, really trying to create like an emergent narrative ecology, we always say, build a foundation for interesting, multiplayer stories to just emerge between players, let them really drive the experience. That's what we're setting out to do here.
Gotcha. How about you, Chris? Any notable reflections from that game?
It took a long time to get right. I actually came in midway through that project's development. I was working on Edith Finch for a while, and then finished that game, and then came over to help out on Sky. And I will say that when I joined Sky, it was still kind of a shell of a game. It had a lot of different pieces in it, a lot of different ideas, and characters and mechanics and whatnot. But it was a real challenge and struggle to say, what's really most important here, what really belongs, what stays, what needs to go away or get killed, what's part of an earlier idea that never really came to fruition, or and so coming into a project midway where it has all these moving parts and is so complex in a lot of ways. It took a lot of time to kind of just sort of see through all of that, understand what really mattered, what was really important. And then also, the game was also just has a lot of, innovations. It's a 3D, let's call it a platformer or, flyer, whatever, on phones. Those don't really exist, trying to create like really well controlled gameplay on a phone and a 3D moving avatar is something that you don't really see. The free to play economy based around gifting was a new innovation, and it took a lot of time to get right. I think there was even a period in the studio's history where, in that project's history, where it was this kind of debate over, is it meant to be more of this playground experience where it's more of a sandbox? Is it meant to be more of this linear experience where it's more of like a hero's journey, kind of like Journey? And then it ends up somewhere in the middle, I think, by the end, being this kind of theme park like experience that we've designed. So lots of learnings and challenges along the way, but ultimately I think came together into something that was quite holistic and successful.
Cool. If we had another hour, I'd spend some more time unpacking some of the bigger ideas here. You guys have worked on a bunch of interesting games that we could spend a bunch of time on each of them. But one more question before we start talking about Gardens. Stephen, you mentioned that you have an extensive background in writing and narrative design, including for What Remains of Edith Finch, which I mentioned is a game that resonated with me quite a bit, and it's cool to hear some of the lore behind, the you mentioned the autobiographical parts of it. And I guess for quick context for those who haven't played, but should, but no spoilers. But the basic premise of the game is that like there's a collection of short stories that the protagonist experiences, and they're all about the day that someone has died in the past. And one thing about that game that I still think about years later is how diverse of a tone all of the stories are in that game, and how it makes you feel a range of emotions that ultimately culminates in a touching ending. And of course, all of that takes place in just one game. And so bigger picture, Stephen, I'm just curious, like, what have you learned about or leveled up in narrative design over the years to really make the most of players going through wide-ranging stories and feeling connected to these games through, all sorts of those different emotions, I guess?
I think it's just been, my approach to narrative design has been like an evolving thing, right? As again, just as I've developed as a designer, and I think like the most important thing when it comes to narrative design is you have that relationship between the player, the virtual world, and that central mechanic that is driving the experience, and just doing whatever I can to not disrupt that relationship. I never want to pull, put myself in the middle of that, or pull agency away from the player. I think like one, it's weird to say as a narrative designer, but I'm like, not every game needs narrative, or every game tells a story in its own kind of particular way. I think like too many games are like try to be interactive movies, which I don't think can be successful personally. When it comes to like the things that we're building now, or what I'm interested in, I'm really interested in kind of like both emergent narrative, whether systemically from like a proc gen perspective, or just between players, right? And so it's really about, like I said, trying to just like bury as much story. If you're creating a big virtual world, bury as much story as deep as you can. You can have history and lore and all of that. But you don't need to spoon feed your audience. You don't need to hammer them over the head with like a million cutscenes. Like, let them go dig it out. I think the most interesting experiences that I've seen in games, especially from like around narrative, are like, the discoveries that players make and then go share outside the game as they build their communities together. I look at, we look at the works of like Fumito Ueda, whether that's like Shadow of the Colossus, which is like my maybe favorite game of all time, to Last Guardian, to even like the Souls games, right? And the Souls games have like a ton of text in them. I don't really read any of that ever. Like I'll read a little bit. It's really in the environmental storytelling and stuff. And often like when you do read the text, it often like is contradictory, or, some details in the environment kind of undercut what you've read. I think that's the most interesting part, because then you start finding communities built outside of the game where they're speculating, they're kind of filling in the gaps together. I want to leave space for the player. I'm not just trying to take them through a guided, end to end, call it interactive movie or what have you. I want them to feel like they are digging out story. They are, sorry, that's my puppy. They are digging out story. They have agency. They are kind of authoring their own legend.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, I could talk about these games that you have worked on in the past all day, but we probably should spend the majority of the conversation, at least from now, talking about what you're working on next, which is your new company, Gardens, and the new game that you're starting to build over there. And from what I can tell, despite having been leaders on many games in the past, Gardens is your first company, and it's been in motion for a couple years now. And so I just have to ask, and Chris, I'll start with you on this one. How has it been taking on just like a new level of responsibility, seeing a new type of work that's involved in being a founder? What have your reflections been so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really rewarding and fulfilling. It's something that we've wanted to do for a long time, is start a studio and kind of create the culture and work environment that we want to show up to every day and want to contribute to and build and grow, and also just get to make the kind of games that we want to work on. We spent a good chunk of time just at the early outset when we first formed the company of just kind of getting things on its feet. There's a lot that we didn't know. There's a lot of learning that we had to do. There's a lot of process and paperwork and whatnot to get a company on its feet. And so there was definitely a lot there, but as we progress, further on, I can more and more my attention can return to the game and to the team. And it's been a really rewarding experience. It's, like I said, it's something that we've considered for a long time. So to be able to have the opportunity and to be able to have investors and partners that see, the vision for what we're trying to grow, it means the world. And we're really excited to be able to make the most of it.
I got to ask, how is it being co-founders as brothers?
I'm enjoying it. I don't know, Steven.
It's been great. Like people joke about it a lot, but do you ever? Well, I think I can count like on one hand the amount of times like Chris and I have ever really argued. We've just always been very close and collaborate really well, and I think share very similar sensibilities, and similarly with our co-founder Lexi. So it's something that we've talked about doing for a long time, as Chris said. And after Sky launched, we started, talking about it really in earnest, and still took like, I think, a year and a half, couple years before we actually, pitched the studio and the game that we're building. We were just, working other projects, consulting for people, et cetera. And just like in off hours, kind of working together to iterate on, not only what we wanted the game that we were going to make to be, but the studio to be. We got pretty far with a few different ideas and kind of kept going back to the drawing board and saying, we like this or we like that, or there's something here, but there's not enough, the legs aren't there, until we got to the idea, that we ultimately pitched the studio on. So it was about a couple of years of like real iterative design until we finally got to the point where we felt confident in, raising capital to start the company. And yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I feel very lucky that I get to make cool stuff, with Chris every day. And we're learning how to, run a company. We definitely are leaning on the support of our partners and stuff. We know what we're good at. We know what we have to learn. It's definitely been a learning process, but just trying to build the place that we want to work at, and build the game that we want to be playing in every day.
Cool. Well, we'll get back to some of that, but I don't want to leave the audience hanging too much. Let's talk about your game. And so I guess, according to your announcement materials, the game is described as an ever-evolving online PvPvE fantasy adventure sandbox ARPG. There's a lot
That's a lot
in
of
that
words.
description. So maybe could you guys unpack what you mean by that? Tell us a bit more about what you're building.
Chris, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I'll break down each of those individual words a little bit. So, online, so shared world, playing with other players, big focus on crossing paths with others. PvE, so there is both collaborative and competitive mechanics in this world at play. Social fantasy adventure sandbox. So it is a sandbox game. Very, very much, interested in building a world that players want to return to every day, that we can host events in, that can kind of be a forever game that becomes a place that players want to return to, that players form community in, that players can grow and build, go on endless adventures together. And then ARPG, action RPG is what the A stands for, action. And I think some of these certain online games or MMOs are a bit more kind of like idle, kind of you click, you wait, that kind of thing. We're very much interested in getting players into the bodies of their characters, in really having this embodied play that's very tactile and very warm. And so a lot of the mechanics that go into the game, into players working together, involve that, and so that you really feel the presence and weight of the other players you're playing with as they go on these adventures together with you.
Yeah, it's very much a game that's inspired by, and I think we say this in the announcement, but it's definitely a game that's like inspired by memories that have stuck with us playing online games over the years, and it's like in particularly moments that we've shared with strangers. Chris, do you want to tell the Final Fantasy story?
Sure, yeah. So an example of that I like to give is I was playing Final Fantasy 11 years and years and years ago. It was pretty much my first MMO, and I was playing that game, and I was in a particular part of the world when it started to rain, and it was a desolate part of the world. Not many people would travel there, namely because there wasn't much mechanical incentive to be there. It's not like that you would get like a lot of experience points by going there, and so naturally it would end up being quite desolate and barren. But I would go, and it started to rain, and so I went to find a nearby cave to sit and watch the rain. And I was surprised when I found another player already sitting there. And after some time, I asked them, why are you here? And they said, I come to watch the rain. And that was the same reason that I was there. And it became this very much this like bonding moment where we became friends, and ultimately would, go on to adventure together.
Yeah, Lexi and I talk a lot about, like the experience of playing something like World of Warcraft and kind of like being out in the wild and pulling too many mobs and like exhausting all your options. And then, just as you're about to die at the last second, someone like a healer crosses your path or something and saves you. And then you just, find yourself, partying up together and adventuring together for hours. And it's like, it's how those new relationships form. And I think like, unfortunately, a lot of games today too often kind of disincentivize or even prevent those kind of interesting and intimate emergent moments from happening between players. So we're really trying to build something that fosters that again and again by design.
Very cool. And I guess, this is a virtual world, and you mentioned, Chris, I think you framed it as more of a forever game, which I think is a new type of game for you guys to build. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious, both kind of what sent you down that path to really choose to build that kind of game, but also just like, because it's different, what new or innovative design challenges are you having to tackle and think through, in these stages of building it out so far?
So I can answer maybe that last one first. We really set out to make the game that we want to play every day. It's a game that's heavily inspired, like Steven said, of the memories that have stuck with us playing online games, and said, how can we make a game that fosters those moments again and again by design. When we think about online games and community building, we think about how can this thing grow and sustain itself and live on and be a home for players. And rather than coming out with a sequel and maybe like bifurcating the player base or, separating the community, just continue to grow and to extend this thing, continue to add new features, continue to add new environments, new mechanics, new narrative, etc. As we flesh out this world. I think Sky as well is intending to be a forever game in its own right. It's very much a collaborative, cooperative game versus, we talked about it's one of the challenges of what we're creating. I think, we're trying to make something where cooperative and competitive play can happen together. And we're trying to make a world where no matter what player type you are, that there's a place here for you and that there's a way to contribute to this world and be a part of it and take action in it. Whether you're, a warrior who wants to, solve things with a sword, or whether you're a more pacifist player who just likes to make potions and cook for people, or whatever kind of player type you are, we want to make room for you and give you the opportunity to play here and find something that really matters and means something to you. I think when it comes to the challenges, creating a game that is both cooperative and competitive, that ultimately, a game with PvP essentially, that ultimately strives to get players to work together, even though there's that PvP, isn't something that we've really seen before. And it's definitely kind of like threading a needle because, in a lot of games you include PvP or competition, and there's a lot of opportunity for toxicity. There's once you get situations where you're reliant on a stranger to solve something or get something done that affects your playthrough and your progression, and that maybe is somehow hindered in some way, these negative relationships can form. So there's a lot there that this tightrope walking that we have to do and kind of think about from a systemic design perspective of how do we get players, despite the ability to go the other way or to work against each other, to ultimately feel kind of compelled to collaborate and cooperate and make those cooperative mechanics and experiences all the stronger. I think we think that, yes, I think both Journey and Sky are beautiful games, but I think there's an opportunity to create something where, in those two games, all you can do is help each other, kind of leave each other, and kind of go off on your own. You can't really work against each other in any way, and there's a real challenge to us is can we make a game where players choose to work together even when they don't have to, and when they can work against each other, because it makes the act of them working together and helping each other all the more meaningful, in our opinion. So, can we strive for that? And that's something that we're working on daily.
Can you maybe tell me a bit more about how you're threading that needle, or are there other games out there that maybe are inspiring parts of how you think about balancing cooperation, competition? Maybe let's just dive a bit deeper.
Yeah, I think it's for us a big part of it is can we create a foundation of cooperative mechanics and cooperative play, and a varied ecology of cooperative play where players, it's kind of like a sort of situation where you won't go as far. Your ruck might run out sooner if you try to go things alone. But if you put your faith in other people, if you put them in strangers, if you learn to be collaborative and helpful, that you'll ultimately progress further in this world. And so, a simple example is, just like coming upon a castle gate and you can't open it yourself and you need someone else. The gate, ultimately what's behind that gate may be, something unique to you, some part of your quest line or whatever, but ultimately there's another player that you need. And so that game where you actually have to recruit and call upon each other to get through these experiences, hopefully lead to new relationships and to new adventures between strangers.
Steven, can you maybe unpack the narrative design side of that and how you're thinking about building something new? And you mentioned kind of I'm forgetting the term, but like the immersive world that, it's lore
kind of like emergent narratives. Yeah. I mean, we really want the players themselves to be authoring the experience and to be, the main drivers of, the dramatic moments that are happening, again and again. We have some fairly innovative features and systems that I don't know that I can talk about yet, but like our world kind of by design offers new opportunities and experiences every time you play. So that alone lends to a lot of just exploration and discovery. And, so it goes back to, like I said, kind of just like creating a world that feels rich with history and lore and secrets and, a feeling of like dormant magic in the world that you want to dig out and awaken, so that you're encouraged, just continuing to find ways to give players these, sometimes big, sometimes mini calls to adventure, to encourage them out. It is, I'm not supposed to make Tolkien references, but it is very much like a game of like strangers to coming together to form like little fellowships and go on, adventures together. And that might be a cooperative one, that might be a competitive encounter. But, finding ways to just like give them opportunities for play without forcing them down a certain line. And just like, if we can continue to give them opportunities, they'll seek out the kinds of experiences that they want. And then it's our job to support that. And that it goes back to like, can you have different, tones and things like that? I think like if you build something holistically, if it's, you want a sense of verisimilitude in terms of like your adventuring and stuff, but like also like lean into the playfulness of it, lean into the jank a little bit of it, and players will kind of run with you. And so we're definitely, looking to kind of strike a fine balance there so that players can seek out the kinds of experiences that they want, and building a world that, will just kind of like organically support that, while also something that continue to be expanded over time. And, there's a bunch of, secret lore that I can't get into, but like creating a space that feels magical, that feels ever expansive, that you are kind of continuing to discover, continuing to coax magic out of. That's the goal.
Well, that sounds exciting, and I look forward to learning more one day and experiencing that for myself. But I guess kind of switching gears to talking a bit more about the business side of this too, because, as founders, you're not just building a game, you're building a business too. It was announced recently that you raised a Series A, which was $31.3 million. It was co-led by our partners at Lightspeed, with involvement from many others. And so my first question here is, why go so big? That's a big raise. Like, can you maybe just unpack some of like why be so ambitious so early on? What are you thinking here in terms of that from the business side?
Sure. Yeah. We raised the way we did to meet the ambition of the project in the studio, the vision that we have for it. It is an ambitious project. We want to be able to scale up to fully execute that. We're going to be, as like our announcement noted, we're hiring again. We're going to be continuing to scale up over the coming years. But, and this is meant to be something that lives on beyond launch and continues to expand and offer new experiences beyond launch. So to also be able to support that. It's not just the capital that we brought in, but also like the support from, our co-leads at Lightspeed and Crafton we have a number of other, companies and angels that came in that offer all sorts of different talents and expertise to help us build out this vision. I think like games are expensive. This is an ambitious title. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing in enough runway to support the studio. I think like, unfortunately, you're seeing, a lot of stories of like studio closures and layoffs. We have a responsibility to our team to take care of them, to protect them. We want to be building this with them for many, many years to come. So building in real, solid runway for the studio, allowing us to go after world-class talent and retain them. When we just looked at our goals for where we wanted, what we wanted the studio to be, what we wanted for the project, where we wanted to go, it just kind of made sense to really go after it with this raise.
Maybe a follow-up to that. Your investor list is sort of a who's who of not just VCs, but also, companies and leading executives from many, if not most, of the industry's leading platforms and companies, it seems like. And so, I mean, for one, congrats on building a great team of investors that have your back. But I'm also just curious, how did you decide who to add to the cap table. Like, what does this wide range of elite investors like tangibly bring to you as a studio? Can you maybe just unpack a bit more, like how you thought about, bringing all of these, impressive people on? What are you really unlocking there?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that, Chris, then you can kind of jump in. I mean, one, it's kind of a reflection of the game we're making too, right? We're making a game about strangers with different backgrounds and talents coming together to try to create something new and create magic together. We definitely try to approach the round that way. I think whether that's like looking at bringing in a blue chip investment firm like Lightspeed that has like real global presence that can help us kind of scale the company from advice from like a corporate governance angle, that'll be there like doing the nitty gritty with us day to day, to someone like Crafton who has experience launching one of the biggest games in the world, live ops experience, go to market support, even things like localization or large scale play testing, things like that. Dreamhaven, who will do everything from help us like scaling the company, hiring, to providing design feedback. Fun Plus, who will help with play testing, similarly like to someone like Crafton. The other VC firms like Transcend and Tirda, who bring both like real industry experience, understanding how games get made, how can provide industry insights there, but also how to scale a company. Just down the line to our cross media partners, things like that. We want this to be a global franchise. We have a lot of aspirations for things that we can do with this title and with the world that we're creating. So finding, partners that have done it before, that know how to do the things that we don't know how to do yet, and that can help lend their support there, as well as like our advisory team, like just even starting to build relationships with the different major platforms, or have insight into how they operate and things like that. It's extremely useful and really, really valuable. And when it came to deciding who to bring in, it really comes down to, not only can they provide capital or what kind of complementary value can they bring, but like, do they understand the vision? Do they see not only what we want the game to be, but how we want to grow the studio, how we want to build, we talk a lot about like sustainable collective growth. We want to build ambitious games in a healthy way. And, we brought in partners that really keyed into that and really embraced that vision. So now we're just constantly asking them for help. I guess that'll just be what we do every day. But so far, they've been more than willing to jump in there with us and lend their expertise.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a great position to be in. Chris, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I think that was well put. It's really just been about bringing together a set of partners that bring complementary value that can help us, whether it's with, running a live service game at scale, to publishing, to growing a team, to maintaining and managing culture, to platform relations. Like these are all things that are really important and critical to a game's success. And so to have people in our camp that have been through these gauntlets before, that have dealt with these problems before and have come out successful on the other side of it, is really is just a great gift. And we have already gotten a lot of help from our partners in terms of getting the company on its feet and getting to where we are with this raise.
Great. Final fundraising question from me. I imagine that we have many listeners who, might one day start a company for themselves, are going to be excited about, building a team around a new game that they're excited about, but we'll also have to go through a bunch of, fundraising, figure it out documents, all of those, starting a company details for the first time, like you guys have. So I'm just curious, like over whether it's fundraising related or just something else related to the nitty gritty details of starting a business. What have you learned or wish you knew 2 years ago that might be helpful for someone else listening?
I don't know if there's one piece of advice that or one thing that I learned. There's so many things that I've learned over the course of the last 2 years. I think one, understanding the deal making process is something that I wish I was more versed in. You kind of just feel like, or at least we felt like we were just stumbling our way through it, kind of fumbling the ball forward again and again and again. I read venture deals like 10 times but that only helps so much. It's helpful, but, you can Google as much as you want, but until you're in it, there's a lot of things that happen very quickly, negotiation tactics that you're not necessarily keyed into, or lingo that's thrown around. So it's just kind of a trial by fire thing. So you learn a lot just going through the process. Starting a company, there's just so much to do all the time. The only advice I have is I constantly just ask stupid questions. Even if I think I know the answer, I'm constantly asking it, as just making sure that I am buttoned up on everything. That I do it all the time, but it's why we pulled together the partners that we wanted to get, right? It was something that we knew, we're new to starting a company. We that would be the one knock against us, right? Where that would the experience side of things. So, leaning on people that you can trust that have been there before, or that understand it, and just ask as many questions as possible. You're gonna make mistakes, but if you have a team around you that is willing to lend a hand, you'll get through it. It's just the funding side of things is I think it's changed a lot too over the last couple of years. We raised seed with a PowerPoint presentation. I think fortunately we had worked on a number of titles that brought some credibility and stuff. We definitely took our time before we raised. We had a full vision for the thing that we wanted to build, so that we could lean on both the games that we had made before, and then a picture of the thing that we wanted to make, and be able to answer, what's our picture for monetization? How does this thing expand? What is 5 years, 10 years down the line look like for this thing? Rather than just going hey, we want to make a game, can you give us money? We made sure that we were at least buttoned up on that aspect from the design angle, so forth, so that we could at least, get people to buy into the vision of it. And then when it came time to do Series A, as we saw the kind of environment shifting and the market getting a lot tougher, we realized we really need to be able to put something in people's hands that they could jump into and play, so we built a prototype demo. We're still in prototyping, but we built a playable prototype that we just brought to potential investors at GDC and just sat down with them behind closed doors, and then we just let them jump into it. Being able to just let them experience it and get a glimpse of what you're making, even if it's not the whole thing, but to get the feeling of what the thing is, I think can be very powerful. Because if we didn't have that, I don't know how we would raise today.
Well, I have 2 or 3 more final questions that we can kind of quickly hit on before we wrap up. But Chris, I want to give you a chance to answer that question too, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen talked about asking a lot of stupid questions. I think it's a small industry, and we've been able to have form relations with a number of great people that have been able to coach us through this. So I would say lean on those networks that you're able to connect with. Put things in front of them, even if they're not ready, so that you can get feedback and you can iterate forward. When you go to have those pitches, maybe save the more precious, partners and whatnot that you're looking to pitch to for later, so that you can get some tries at pitching with some of the other parties and learn what kind of questions they have, learn what sort of gaps are in your presentation, so that when it comes time to present to the people that you really care about, you're all buttoned up. So that's just the words of wisdom.
Yeah, build more decks so that you can go, oh, I have a deck for that, and then pull it out when they ask a question. They love that.
Great advice. Lots of decks. So maybe a couple questions before we end. You mentioned earlier in the conversation how you want to build games in a sustainable way, where you can create positive experiences for all types of players, but also for all the people who are working with you too. And so in the press materials, I think one of you says, and I quote, "We are also named Gardens after the way that we make our games. We believe in sustainable collective growth. That means sharing a responsibility to care for one another and crafting our ambitious games in a healthy way." So could you maybe just share a bit more about how you're uniquely designing your company culture, and whether there's any experiences from the past that just kind of melded and shaped the way that you're thinking about building this business differently?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I want to say, I don't think we are uniquely doing anything. I think that there are a lot of really great studios that are also trying to build things in a more sustainable manner. And we're constantly trying to learn from them. We are constantly, as Chris mentioned, been fortunate to be building up a network of other founders of other studios, sharing ideas together. I think if a bunch of us succeed, then, things can be done differently. It's not just a competitive thing here. So sharing best practices, we've a lot of the things that we've gotten credit for, we were ideas that we incorporated from that other studios were doing, that we incorporated and then kind of put our own spin on or what have you. And then are willing to, share that with others, because I think if you're going to see change happen in the industry, it has to be repeatable, and it has to be successful at scale. So I would just say we're not unique there. I think when it comes to how we're trying to do things, it's an ever evolving process. We are trying to scale a globally distributed studio. There are challenges with that, how you maintain, collaboration and communication and so forth as you have people all around the world. We try to things that we do try to do, we really try to make sure that the team is working sustainable working hours, gets time away from work, because you're going to have deadlines. You're working with people, including yourself, that are passionate about the things that you're making. You're going to put the work in at times. And it's our job to make sure that you're getting rest, you're getting, you're going away from it so that you can be inspired again and come back to it with fresh eyes. We do things like practice pay transparency at the company. Everybody at the studio knows what everybody else makes. I don't know why that is considered to be I don't know if controversial is the right word, but it just seems obvious to me. People know, unless they know that they're being treated fairly. They know that they can chart their own path to promotion and advocate for themselves. We're trying to attract world-class talent and keep them here so that we can be successful. And so, the more that we can just do to treat our teammates the way that we want to be treated, I think will put us in a position to succeed. We've all experienced crunch culture and burnout up close. I've seen people that I love dearly leave the industry who are massive talents. And it's just or just wonderful people. And that is a real loss to the industry. So anything that we can do to just continue to get better at, how we treat one another, we're committed to doing.
Love it. Final question for you, Chris. I know it's still early and you're all working hard, hacking away at game number 1, but let's zoom into the future for a moment. In 10 to 15 years, or you can pick your time period, what does Gardens look like? What are you ultimately building towards here?
Yeah, so the game that we're working on, this meant to be a forever game, is meant to be the financial spine of the company, and with that, something that we can continue to grow and expand over time for many, many years down the road. I mean, you look at something like World of Warcraft or any these games that are upwards of a decade or two. It's possible, and I just was playing World of Warcraft a couple weeks ago. Not to say that we're building that game, but it's about having something. This one project that we're talking about. This should be at this point in the future. It would have many years behind it. It would be bigger and bigger than how it started. We'd still continue to host events in that world and bring players into it and continue to remix and transform and use it as a place to try out new ideas and have it be a place where we can experiment with the community at scale, and then having other projects in parallel with that. So, after this project is out, while we'll continue to grow it, we'll probably spin up a second team, maybe, and then down the road, maybe a third team, and looking at being a multi-project studio with 2, maybe 3 things in parallel at any one time.
Very cool. Final question for you guys. I know you're hiring. You're going to be hiring. And there's people out there who might want to work with you guys. And also, too, just people who have enjoyed games that you've helped make in the past are probably interested in staying aware of, the updates here. For those who want to stay in the know or get in touch in some kind of way, where should they go? How should they reach out?
Yeah, so our website has our contact info. It's www.gardens.dev, DEV as in developer. You can also go on Twitter. We're Gardens Devs on Twitter. But those are kind of the 2 places to hit us up. In the future, we'll probably open up a Discord and go that route. But for now, our Twitter or our hello email is the best place to approach us. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely be bringing out more in the near term. I think it was a lesson that we've learned from previous games, Blaseball, what have you. We want to be deving a bit more in public. I don't really believe going away for 5 to 7 years and just developing something in a silo is really the future for development. I think you want to build your community, pull people in, make, do play tests, just kind of start to get the game on its feet before you're even at an alpha or an early access or what have you. So we will be bringing things out, whether that's, Discord or what have you, just to start building it up more. But for now, yeah, the website or the Twitter. Awesome.
Well, Chris, Steven, this hour has been an absolute joy. I can't wait to keep on following Gardens and what you're working on and learning more and playing eventually too. So that's going to be a bunch of fun. But for now, thank you both so much for hopping on.
We'll get you in a play test. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.